Good evening, everyone. Merry post-Christmas, happy almost 2026, or whatever it is you're supposed to say between that odd period between Christmas and New Year's. We are in this live stream, of course, going to be talking about what waits for us in the year to come in 2026. I'm going to introduce our panelists here as we go along. I will add to the stage here Sean Waitley. No stranger to the show, but it has been a bit since you've been with us, Sean. Sean, of course, is our international guest coming from the great nation of Canada. And good, you've got it all there in your name. He's the host of the aptly named Concepts with Sean Waitley. Good to have you with us.
Good to be back, Josh.
And I will add, of course, to the stage Ryan Rogers, who has also been here a number of times. He well represents, wrote The Woke Mind, as well as a number of other books. But he insists that's the one you need to start with because it condenses a lot of his thoughts very well. You are host of the reality. I think I've got this right? The reality therapy. Okay, yeah. Reality Therapy podcast. I've been on his show. He's been on mine, and it's always good to have you on the panel. And it looks like we have joining us from parts unknown, Avi Wolf. Avi, good to have you with us.
Nice to be here.
Avi is the host of the also aptly named Avi's Conversational Corner. There we go.
Yes.
Are you still puttering around the what would it be like the 1870s through 1890s era, or have you closed that period?
Yeah, I'm still doing that. Although I plan on doing episodes on other topics soon. But yeah, I'm doing an interview tomorrow on the question of Chinese immigration in that era, which I think has some particularly relevant issues for us today in terms of the fights and arguments about closing off immigration from there and when and why and so on and so forth. So just stay tuned.
Fair enough. We look forward to it. And I'm going to add to the stage, last but certainly not least, destroying the symmetry of our screens here, Brooke Medina, no stranger to saving elephants. Brooke is good grief, communication specialist for the State Policy Network. I'm blanking on the actual title.
Vice President of Communications.
Thank you. I am so sorry. I can't believe I squabbled that.
Specialist. I don't mind.
Well, I was going to say you were the only one of us that doesn't have a podcast, but don't let that fool anyone. You're also the only one, so far as I can tell, who gets paid for speaking.
That is a joy of being the comms specialist that I am. So I'm glad to be here. Thank you. And my ring light just went out. So if it looks like I'm in a cave right now, it's just because the ring light isn't doing the work anymore.
It looks fine. We have people joining us on the live stream. As always, you are more than welcome to post your comments here live. If they're relevant, if they're helpful, I will be happy to share them here with our panelists as we have a discussion. It's an open-ended discussion, but I'm going to try to center it down a little bit. I want to explain, first of all, what I'm doing here. 3 of the 4 of you, Sean, Ryan, and Avi, just completely coincidentally, actually, were part of the previous discussion I had on curbing political violence. What exactly do we do to mitigate political violence in this country? And I feel like both that and this, hey, what does the future portend for us, are equally unfair questions, and that I would be shocked if any of you came on here saying, I know exactly how to answer these open-ended questions. Who on earth would actually have the answer to that? That being said, I'm going to say again what I said then, which is that part of the reason I want to have these discussions is because I think it is extremely needful that people of good integrity and who speak well and who have I'm going to call it a broadly sensible worldview, embark on these conversations, if for no other reason than there's an awful lot of yahoos out there who don't share those traits, who are speaking about these things. And it's not just limited to AI, but AI is definitely one of those things where I think the conversation would be better served if individuals who had a more, let's say, theocratic-centric, classical, traditionalist perspective that has a lot of good things to say about human nature were weighing in on the conversation, rather than just the technologists who are incredibly brilliant, but may not actually know what they're talking about when it comes to how humans interact with technology and how they historically always have. So with all that being said, as sort of a preamble, if you will, I want to start here first before we get down into the specifics of AI or politics or all that. From my perspective, the word I keep hearing the most about what is going to happen here in 2026 is not optimistic or pessimistic, it's uncertainty. And maybe it's fair to say that that's really true of all years, but it just seems to me that that's more true now with technological advancements as we're moving into this, with trade deals, with technological changes. there's a lot of people out there who's like, it could be good, it could be terrible. I just really don't know. Is that a fair summation? And if not, what word would you use or what feeling would you evoke to what we're likely going to be facing in 2026?
Yeah, I think that uncertain. I like that you bookmarked uncertainty. I think that's the correct term right now, because it's not just the technological uncertainty. It is the foreign relations level of uncertainty that comes along with that. The economic uncertainty that is aligned with that. The societal implications. I was just reading an article in Wall Street Journal about people experiencing AI-induced psychosis. And so there are all of these elements to the uncertainty that create at least a perception of instability that people, if they don't have strong community grounding, strong center and like integrity internally, it makes it exceedingly difficult. And even if they, under the best circumstances, if you do, you're entering this labor market or in this labor market where there's significant disruption because of AI, it can be very, very uncertain, as you mentioned. And so I do think that a lot of 2026 is going to look like asking more questions. You're going to see a lot of public policy moves when it comes to AI and tech policy in particular, as lawmakers and other electeds try to get in front of some of this. But no one really knows where this is going to land, much like the Industrial Revolution that came before, which is why this has oftentimes been alluded to as the Fourth Industrial Revolution.
Do you want me to put my hand up, Josh?
No, just there's few enough of us you can just hop in.
I could see Ryan clicking on his button, unmuting his mic. No, I love the question. Uncertainty is certainly a great place to start. I would take a different frame and I would say I love uncertainty. I love uncertainty itself. One of my guests spent her life in political analysis, and she's a consultant. She said everything is up for grabs. It's the first time in her career where she sees everything up for grabs when it comes to political thought, platform building, more in retail politics. And I think the quest for certainty is the aberration. And I think that's the thing that creates really toxic problems for us. So I'm speaking from the Great White North, which is heavily regulated, and you can't sneeze without a regulation saying how you're supposed to do it and dispose of your Kleenex and all the rest. And I think it's a fool's game to try to chase certainty. So if we can find a healthy way to say uncertainty is a normal fact of life, and we are going to figure out a way to live together and enjoy each other's company, even if we can't stand each other. So I'm thinking more on a political, societal level with a healthy degree of uncertainty. I think it's the quest for certainty that leads to tyranny and oppression. And so I'm hoping we won't have someone come along and say, I'm here to save you all. Here is now a certain path forward. That's the scariest thing in my mind for the next year.
If I may push back a little politely on that point, it's definitely pointless to try and pursue complete certainty at any point in history that you can find. Even periods in which you thought there was relative stability, there were still wars, there were still famines, there was still disease, there was still all sorts of disasters that could have befallen you. That said, there is a reason, for instance, that even the squishiest of McSquishers and conservatives, for instance, fought like hell for things like a stable currency or for things like a relatively stable job market, where even if you lost out, you had options. Even if you were on the downswing, you still had a horizon to climb your way back up. I think that even if you can't find stability, at the very least saying there's always the possibility of going back up. There's always the possibility of bouncing back. There's always the possibility of retooling yourself. That was very much the promise of the first month. You mentioned the technologists who are incredibly brilliant at their technical things, but are either indifferent or completely out to lunch, in my opinion, when it comes to societal effects. And they talk in these insanely fantastical ways about how everybody's going to be out of work. Everybody's going to be basically dependent on the government for whatever, universal basic income they're going to have. They're going to have no dignity, often indifferent to humanity, and sometimes even anti-humanity. And their voices are very loud. And if we want to, even if we don't have answers, even if we want to be counter that, we need to be able to come up with some vision, some concrete examples of people who bounced back during the previous industrial revolutions by sitting at the mercy of the government for the rest of your life because of this technology. Things will change, but doesn't have to be that way. There are other options. And I think that's something we think, even if we don't find
Avi, I'm going to jump in. I'm going to jump in right here, and I'm sorry because I appreciate what you're saying. I'm getting most of it, but I'm also getting a lot of. I'm assuming everybody else can hear this. A lot of audio feedback, and it's. Hopefully it'll be restored here in a moment. No, that's fine. I didn't want to go too far if we couldn't make out much to your point. I do think we got the gist of it, and I do want to return to uncertainty, good, bad, that sort of thing. But I also want to give, of course, Ryan Rogers an opportunity to weigh on this first topic before we move on.
Yeah, for me, I think we're in a big time of transition. From there's the power transition from away from Democrats and towards Republicans, but just generally in the culture, there's a big shift. We had like decades of cultural revolution, sexual revolution, unshackling yourself from these outdated puritanical norms and things like that. And we've kind of hit this wall where people are unsatisfied with the relationships. I saw a study where 81% of Gen Z fantasizes about monogamy, which just struck me as just wild. And we're in this kind of return to more traditional norms, return to religious participation, and I'm interested to see what that's going to look like, because with kind of the more progressive vision of things, it was we're liberating ourselves, we're concerned about the marginalized, things like that. And the way it actually turned out was it was very, very different from how it was sold. And I think we're entering this new era, return to Christianity and return to conservative traditional values. I think it's going to look very differently than we imagine in our heads when we talk about that from here. And I think this, new things like AI, like how do you recreate the 1950s with AI? I mean, these are the type of questions that are going to be very relevant going forward.
And it's an interesting point, Ryan, and it's one that I definitely am interested in. Are we seeing did we hit the peak nuns when it comes to religious or the secularization of parts of the West, at least the United States? I don't know. There are some hopeful signs. I'm sort of waiting because I also know that these things that we're talking about, a religious life, a life of traditional values, is really hard. And it takes more than just somebody saying, this isn't where it was go a different way. I'm hopeful, but we shall see. And that is certainly something that I don't know that we're going to see in 2026, but it may be over the next decade. We could begin to see some very significant changes. I wanted to return to this uncertainty model because I'm wondering to what degree we're using uncertainty in two different senses. One is I can agree with Sean if what we mean by uncertainty is we ought as humans to be able to embrace this general notion that the idea we can control things is somewhat of an illusion, or the degree to which we can control things. Now, granted, we do have some control. We don't necessarily always know how much. And certainly a Western model or way of looking at things is we do try to impose an awful lot of control over nature, human nature, physical nature, and seem to think that the sky's the limit. We put a man on the moon. Why couldn't we do this? I do think that there is a degree to which tempering that excess with a sort of humility of we're not really in control is a healthy way to look at things, while also Avi, I think, makes and again, I'm sorry, Avi, because you were cutting out there just a little bit, but I think as I understood it, and these are my words, not yours, but as I put it, part of the project of a classical conservative is to consistently try to root an ever-changing world in some sort of a fixed standard, something that's fixed, not because change is bad, but as sort of a philosophy towards change. It needs to be mitigated, it needs to be controlled, it needs to be tempered. It needs to be recognized that change can also be destructive, and how do we not throw out the baby with the bathwater, if you will? And so I'll open it up to Sean and Avi also, but also Brooke and Ryan with any thoughts. Are those fair ways of, are we using uncertainty in two very different senses here? Or do you defend the position that no, uncertainty is actually a good or perhaps a bad thing?
Yeah, I'll jump in briefly. I was so relieved, Avi, that you were cutting in and out because it weakened your argument and made no, just kidding. You made a great everything we heard came through really beautifully. So it was great. And I think Josh, you've captured it when you said humility. So I hope I didn't come across as a radical relativist where absolutely nothing matters and there is no truth and everything's up for grabs. What I meant is that everything's up for grabs on what we thought was settled truth, and I'm thinking more of the conservative political movement in Canada and the United States. So certainly, Trump came in and seemed to blow up whatever we thought was republicanism. And now we're going through similar but different changes in Canada as well. So I've come across this framing of it recently as conservative. So I'm really deep into the reading about philosophical conservatism, and it seems like it's a mediation between the universal and the particular. After World War II, we were obsessed with we'd figured it all out. We're in a liberal, rules-based international order, and politics is merely a technical activity, and we have political technology, and we'll keep the lights on, and everybody can go about and do whatever they want. All of that seems to have come under question. And I don't think we have to be completely pessimistic about that. To Avi's point and to Ryan's point, I think it will drive people back to say, well, how did we build these great nations? What are the roots? What have we inherited? What can we be honest about when we think about what we've inherited, the good things that we've inherited? And I think conservatism mediates between those universal truths which are applicable across time, as well as trying to figure out how to find solutions to the particular problems we face today that seem really new, like AI.
I entirely agree with you there. I think a very big part of the problem is that AI is just so incredibly new, at least for the broader population, the broader audience, people who are not in the know or in the AI industry, that we don't have much experience to work with. We don't have many examples to work with to describe yes or no. It's all potentialities, good or bad. And I think that kind of puts us at a disadvantage. It's hard to make the argument, well, this is just going to be like those previous industrial revolutions where we adapt, where we know so little right now. I hate to be a party pooper, but I think that this sort of discussion will be much more fruitful and productive in, say, 5 years, where we have a much better idea of how it affects more than, say, the upper level computer world or the world of designing or even the world of search. And we'll be able to use more practical examples of how it affects and doesn't affect the world. Even people who talk about, for instance, the mass layoffs or the refusal to hire entry-level workers in corporations. I see that a lot on YouTube channels that talk about employment. That seems to be more like basing itself on potentialities more than we don't really need entry-level workers. And we really need to see, is that going to last? If it lasts, we can have a discussion. But in the meantime, it seems like everybody's groping in the dark, even with people with much more knowledge and much more money and many more people to look at this thing than we do. So I think that we really have to adopt a wait and see and just collecting examples, good and bad. And once we have an accumulated stock of experience, right, I think we can have a much more fruitful discussion on this subject.
So I can appreciate that wait and see approach, but I do think that there's something to be said about just looking at where society is as far as just morally. How grounded is society? How connected is it? How connected are we to our communities? What are crime rates? Things like that, to better understand how then people will to make prognostications here as to how we will manage AI, because AI isn't inherently moral or immoral in and of itself. Just like when capitalism came on the scene, it wasn't inherently moral or immoral. It has to do with it. It is a reflection of who we are as people, where we're at, what our hearts look like. And I think the same will be the case with how we wield AI. And so I don't know. I think that we can read more tea leaves than maybe Avi believes we can. Sure, we can. There's Amara's law, which is at play. For those who aren't familiar with that, it's that there is a tendency to over project and the impact of a technology, and then eventually it iterates, and the impact is mitigated in reality. Certainly, that will probably be the case with AI as well. However, even so, it's just, who are we as people? How do we treat one another? To me, like, this gets back at like some deeper root level issues of, how do we look at our fellow man? Like, that's how we will make some projections and predictions about how society grapples with a huge change like this. The AI will not, the AI advancements aren't going to be what fuels us into some dystopian world or some utopian one. It's at its core, who are we as people, and how do we treat one another, and how do we structure society, and are there still institutions by which we can navigate and make sense of the world around us, including the family and community.
I kind of want to build off of that. In the past few weeks, I've heard people say that ChatGPT has definitively proven that God exists. Other people have said definitively proven God does not exist, that Donald Trump is a fascist, that everyone who doesn't like Donald Trump is mentally ill. And I think the conclusion I come to is ChatGPT, or whatever your AI is, tells you what you want to hear. And I think, kind of building off that, I think a big risk is retreating into our own personal worlds, where we're kind of siloed off from other people, and we just kind of live in our truth, kind of like accelerationist postmodernism, where it's just like, my world, I control the reality, and I don't have to bump into your reality at all.
That's an excellent point. I am, gosh, there's so many avenues we could go down with AI in particular. So I want to float this idea out there, and I just want to see what you guys think of it. I'm being uncharacteristically optimistic for those who know me, and that I have hope that our capacity for dealing with the technological advancements of AI may actually be buttressed by the fact that we've kind of been through this before. Everyone on this panel sort of remembers the early days of, say, social media. Some of us may remember the early days of, say, the .com era and all the, blue sky, everything's wonderful. And I think you would be hard-pressed today to find all that many people who can't imagine any way that this technology could go awry or could cause anything, cause any sort of social or civic harm. I'm not talking about your doomsday, James Cameron Terminator situation, but just sort of adding gasoline to the dumpster fire that is social media. What happens when, my dear grandmother, who keeps sending, okay, that's a fictitious example, it's not my actual grandmother, the dear old relative of mine that keeps sending these sort of fake social media news stories. Well, what happens when there's now video on it and it literally looks like it was Donald Trump that said this thing? I am wondering, this is where the hope, I guess, would come in. Are we potentially getting a do-over? Do we have this capacity in this world to have a group of people who've now said, look, we've been through this before. These technologies are great, but they also cause a lot of destruction. So at every step of the way, we're going to be a little bit more clear-eyed, call it cynical, call it cautious about how they get slow-rolled or implemented into our life. Or is that entirely unrealistic? Is this stuff advancing so quickly and it's just so ubiquitous that nobody really is controlling things? Brooke, I know you were kind of alluding to, I guess, policy, and maybe I think you had posted that question when I had Jonah Goldberg on about what policies. I think it's great we're talking like that, and I think we need to. I also don't have an enormous amount of confidence in our current political structure to kind of get out ahead of this stuff. I think they will eventually, but it may take some time. So I guess I'm just kind of curious, like, is my hope founded or not?
So if I may, the example of social media is a really great one, because that was a technology that started out as a real curio or or a chance to catch up with friends. And especially after 2008, and the mass marketing of smartphones, it absolutely ballooned. It exploded. It spread faster than COVID, arguably. And for good and bad. I mean, I owe pretty much every job I've ever gotten in that period was thanks to social media. I met my wife on social media, so I can't say that it's all bad. But the problem is that, yeah, I don't see the same thing not happening with AI, with everybody using it in a way they think is to their advantage, often recklessly, often in a dangerous way, often in an uncontrolled way, and often with the illusion that they think they can control it, right? Because in theory, on social media, you can control exactly who follows you. You can control exactly who your friends are. You can control exactly who you're listening to, like Ryan Rogers said. But that is something of an illusion because A, you don't listen to people who might have a good contrary perspective who can keep you back in balance. And B, you're not exactly in control because the algorithm is constantly recommending things to you that you just find yourself automatically clicking on and using, even if it's not necessarily in your best interest. I remain firm in my opinion, and I may be wrong, but that is my opinion, that it's really going to come down to, after we have all gained a stock of experience about the good and the bad of what this stuff does for the ordinary person. I'll let companies and governments worry about it from their end. It is only when we really have that we'll start to, I hope, have a healthier attitude to how to use AI, when to use AI, and in what context. You see this, for instance, with the previous thing with social media and phones, with schools at first surrendered en masse to phones. They said, we're going to let them use phones. They can play on it all day. You just need to teach better. And finally, and this is irrelevant to politics, both progressive and conservative and what have you, schools that just want to run normally said, no, they can be on their phones outside of school. They cannot be on their phones in school. So there might be that approach in school. The question of how parents should handle it is an important question in and of itself. I don't know whether the law should come into it. I'm not going to take a stand there. But I think it's really just going to be, we're going to have to, maybe I should amend my opinion a little bit and say that instead of waiting and seeing passively, we should be actively looking at how this affects different people. And we should focus, in my opinion, as much as possible on ordinary men and women. This is a mistake that a lot of people make. They focus almost exclusively on elite discourse in, say, places like the Atlantic or the New York Times or the Washington Post or what have you. Our concern should really be about how ordinary men and women handle AI and what good does it do for them and what bad does it do for them. And just like social media, and come up with recommendations and find ways through institutions, through traditions, through communities to make good recommendations for handling it best. That's my view.
So maybe I'll jump in there. Yeah, Avi, well said. You said we should be actively looking at the impact. And Josh, I hope you're not going to get mad at me later for promoting someone else's book here. But my good friend Grant Haver's written a book, Marshall McLuhan, The Medium is Still the Message. And I couldn't help thinking, Avi, when you were saying looking at the impact, that's exactly what McLuhan preached also. He wasn't a preacher. He was a philosopher, writer, author. I think Woody Allen even was at his house. And so he was very famous for a time in the 1960s. But he said, we're sleepwalking through the change that's happening around us. He says, we're a print-based culture. And now we have a televised global community. And we have to ask what this new medium, this whole community that we're in, that's saturated with. Now we're talking about AI, but we were just talking about social media. McLuhan was talking about television and radio. We're saturated in this environment, which is itself the new medium. And he said we tend to apply rear view thinking to our policies. He said politics, I wrote this quote down, politics offers yesterday's answers to today's questions. And to Avi's point, we actually need to be looking at, okay, we've just invented nuclear fission. Could this potentially create an atomic bomb? So we need to be asking it before we make the bomb. Marshall McLuhan would say, not because we're being pessimistic, but because the creation of the technology around nuclear energy will definitely lead to somebody creating a bomb. And so I think if McLuhan was alive today, he would say we need to be looking at what's baked into this AI itself and try to think. I agreed with what Brooke said, let's make Let's think about what's going on today. But Brooke, I totally disagree with you on writing policy, only because I've written so much bad policy myself, and that I would be too scared to let any of you write policy on it. But I get your point. We need to be thinking about it.
Yeah, and I would say the conversations are happening, not that there is a particular policy prescription to this that is actually going to remedy the problems and worries that parents have, even, for example. But the fact is that big tech companies are chomping at the bit for government regulators to come in and regulate some of this to create some hegemony around their own market share here. There's also the China factor of this and regulation around that and global competitiveness. So lawmakers who don't know what they're dealing with are writing policy on this, or they're trying to. Here in the US, though, I mean, there is a big conversation and debate around an AI moratorium at the federal level. Trump just recently this month released an executive order that called for that sort of moratorium in certain circumstances surrounding AI. And so you're seeing, even within the conservative movement here in the US, there is some headbutting in with regards to policy and what the correct approach is. Is it a states-based patchwork approach, or is it a federal moratorium? So the policy conversations are happening. But one thing we haven't discussed yet, we've talked more about AI and culture and society and what that means. But, and I appreciate your optimism here, Josh, because that is not typical for you. You usually call me the Pollyanna here.
Yeah.
And you are usually more pessimistic. But all of the opportunities that AI technological advances have created for healthcare and agriculture is really promising, and it's exciting. Same with, Sean, you mentioned nuclear. Same with nuclear energy, right? That ability to create a clean energy that fuels economies and keeps families warm at a much lower rate to the ratepayers. These are incredible advances. So I'm overall very optimistic, wary definitely of government intervention, but I do think there's going to come, some of this is going to come to a head when we do see there's a real human toll to some of these advances that, to Avi's point, we haven't seen yet. We don't know what the count is going to be when it comes to casualties related to this. We also don't know, though, what people are actually going to be able to upskill, get better jobs. There's a lot of promise here, but there is going to be some rocky roads ahead, I imagine.
I would say I'm very optimistic in terms of the impact AI will have on the economy, and very pessimistic in terms of the impact it will have on culture. To build off Marshall McLuhan, I have Neil Postman's "Amusing Ourselves to Death." That's another fascinating, great, written in the 80s and still so relevant today. And a big point he makes is the epistemology of America is not, is this true or false? It's, does it entertain me? And to go back to the example you're using, Josh, about like this, there's a fake AI video of Donald Trump. We're coming to an age where you could say like, hey, I've definitively proven that this is like AI. This didn't actually happen. And someone might not actually care. Whether it actually happened or not is like less relevant to, it reinforces the narrative that I like. It entertains me. Like, you're bringing facts into this equation is not quite as relevant as you think it is.
I appreciate you saying that, Ryan, because that's kind of what was bubbling up in my mind before you mentioned it, is the so much of what we're talking about, whether or not we're heading to dystopia or utopia, I think, and neither of which in totality we're headed towards, is, I think, in a lot of ways dependent on the integrity of the culture itself. I'm reminded years ago of a clearly fake image. I don't know how many people even remember this, but when President Trump was sworn in the first time, there was this kind of brouhaha about when he had went to the Middle East and he had kind of deferentially nodded his head toward the crown prince of, I believe it was Saudi Arabia. And there were a lot of, air quotes, conservative meme generators that went out there, and they created this false image of President Barack Obama when he was president, literally bowing at the hip at a perfect 45-degree angle to the ruler of Iran on the golden throne, which was clearly fake. No American president has met the Iranian rulers since the 1970s. Also, that would have made Barack Obama probably the most flexible president we've ever had. But the number of people that just believed this obviously fake, what Trump did wasn't a bow, this was a bow kind of thing. I think there was such a desire to believe something that you kind of look past things. And I think there's a lot of instances in which I can look at an AI video and know, okay, it looks real. It really does look real. But I also have enough, say, incredulousness or to know, yeah, but people don't talk like this, or to sort of, to know to try to spot the fake. I know it's scarier as these things begin to look more and more realistic, but I think what I'm far more concerned about is just the general integrity of the culture. Do we want to be lied to? Do we want to uphold some sort of standard of truth, or believe that truth is, at least something that we're, let's say, uh, as a whole, as a nation, all trying to strive toward, that it's not just my side contains the truth, the other side is incapable of the truth. And I think too that relates to kind of a policy discussion. I just think of the nature of policy. And Brooke, you're right. Things like international, things like China, things that we can see today. We need to be talking about. The policy discussions are obviously already happening, but oftentimes politics is necessarily downstream of events. It's sort of like as things develop, then we begin to learn how to tangle with them. And I'm less concerned about our ability just to intellectualize our way through that, to be smart enough about it. And I'm more concerned about, do we have the integrity to kind of anchor to truths and things that are real, so that we can expect our policymakers, our leaders, to be behaving in our best interests. Go ahead, Avi.
I have an unfortunately very pessimistic take on that, at least in the short future. And that is that everybody in the institutions that people used to really trust, and it didn't matter who you voted for, generally speaking, and it didn't matter where you landed in the political sphere, you generally trusted those institutions to generally tell you the truth. And if you look at poll after poll after poll after poll, it doesn't matter the outfit, trust in what used to be traditional institutions, right, left, and center, has just nosedived. So even if AI didn't exist, that problem would be an absolutely massive one, right? Even if AI was going to be invented 50 years from now, we'd still have a real problem with people no longer having its, in order for institutions to really have their role, they need to be shared. They need to be the kind of people where it doesn't matter if you voted red or you voted blue, you can trust the information that comes from them, right? It doesn't matter, medical, religious, scientific, sociological, whatever you want to do. You can generally, like, to give a good, for instance, 40 years ago, no matter what histories you were reading, right, wherever they came down in favor of this or that, you could always trust that they were not making stuff up, right? You could always trust that they were always presenting you with evidence that you could check, that you could look up, and that you could confirm, and everybody could agree on a certain common language. Nowadays, and you see this every so often, you see the worst examples on social media, but you can see other examples elsewhere where it doesn't matter anymore. Even in academia, in a lot of places, unfortunately, all that matters is, are you on my side or are you not on my side? So in order to be able to rebuild the role that institutions used to play, you need to be willing to go back to serving both sides. You need to be willing to rebuild a shared language, even if it means, if you are personally very, very liberal or very, very conservative or whatever it is, you need to be willing to rebuild, and it takes a long time, right? Trust is very easily lost, and it is very hard to regain once you lose it. And in fact, one of the things I like to point out sometimes is that Reagan actually led to an increase in trust in government, if you look at the polls. Because after Nixon and after a decrease in faith in Carter, Reagan's vision of a smaller government, but a government you can trust, actually worked. It actually made a lot more people say, okay, no matter what side of the things I come on, I trust it. So, and the third thing, and that's something that really troubles me, is that how are we going to do that? Because pretty much all the institutions, again, that used to be shared and used to be trusted by most people, no matter where they felt politically, are so overwhelmingly one-sidedly dominated by one political side. How are you going to do that? How are you going to rebuild that shared infrastructure? And I wish I had an answer, but unfortunately, I do not, at least at the present time.
So maybe I'll jump in there. Yeah, great comments. So many notes that to respond to the other comments you guys have made. I think not Avi. Ryan, you said earlier about you Google one thing and you'll find one result, and Google something else, you find exactly the opposite. Josh, you just talked about the Obama picture. I can't wait to Google it and see that picture. It sounds exciting. But Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, perhaps you guys have all heard this comment, but he talks about large language models and chat GPT, etc., as being stochastic parrots. They're basically a stochastic parrot. And I thought, stochastic, oh, I've heard that word before. I think it was a first year stats course or something. So I had to go remind myself. And so a stochastic just refers to a distribution. It's like a normal distribution of average responses, but it doesn't situate around truth. So normally we think of a bell curve, in the middle of the bell curve, well, that's got to be the true opinion when we're talking about politics. But when you're talking about Googling a result or AI or chat GPT, it's actually giving you the bell curve of what you like to see. So it's purely stochastic, and it just parrots it right back to you. Then that was what Ryan mentioned earlier. So I'd encourage you to think about that term, stochastic parrot. I thought it was brilliant. And then to Avi's comments about institution, I agree with you. That's super pessimistic here too. I think Yuval Levin said, I'm not an optimist, I'm a conservative. So he says we can have hope, but we don't just have optimism. But it reminds me again of this concept of a print-based culture. So America, Canada, the whole West was really built up on this concept of a print-based culture. And to read something in print, you have to have the freedom to go grab a book. You do it by yourself. So it's centered on privacy, the individual, freedom of thought, freedom of conscience. You develop your own opinion. So you foster a certain kind of value, a certain set of values, a certain way of looking at the world. If a culture grows up and develops based on print, when you move to an audio or audio-visual approach, you're not by yourself. You're doing it like we are today, right? And I'm not saying this is bad. It's good to have conversations. And this is what I struggle with having a podcast. Am I feeding into this tribe mentality and undermining the print-based culture? But that's why I always refer people back to books to read. But I think if we can rediscover literacy, rediscover books, not digital books, printed books, there's a chance to rebuild institutions. It's been done before. I think it can be done again. And I'm starting to see, so I mentioned my kids are all in their 20s. I'm starting to see a trend going back to, they're pulling out their iPods and MP3 players. So they're downloading songs onto their MP3s and they're getting corded, these are IEMs, but old-fashioned earbuds, wired earbuds. So I think there's hope, because especially the young people, the Gen Zers and the alphas, are saying, yeah, something's not working here. And maybe some of the old ways do actually hold out more hope than what we've been doing for the last 5 years.
I don't know how much hope. I don't know if hope is the word I would use. If the young people are looking at the iPod as retro now, that actually makes me feel pretty decrepit.
So I do have a question, Sean, and everyone else. Sean, you talked about the virtues of the print-based culture, and I agree. I mean, right now my laptop, because I'm in a hotel room, is sitting on top of 5 books, actually, and big fan of them. I travel with them. They are called my emotional support pile of books, and so I just bring them wherever I go. However, if we're looking at it strictly like chronologically and assigning like a virtue to, and maybe you're not, but like, is there a virtue to a print-based culture because it came before the audiovisual one? And is that like where the virtue lies? Because I think about what came before the print-based culture. It was the oral culture of sharing stories and communicating that way. And so I get the point about the medium being the message, but I also think just the message is the message, and the medium is basically the vehicle to deliver that essential message in a way like, if, thinking about scripture, the Apostle Paul says, I become all things to all people so that I might reach them. And so to me, the medium is the beauty of that. It's kind of like that architectural maxim of form following function. The form of how I deliver that message is just dependent upon the culture I'm in. But I don't know that a reversion back to a print-based culture solves that. I think it's much deeper than that.
Yeah, great. Do you want me to try to respond to those impossible comments, Josh?
Sure, go right ahead.
That's no fair.
Put you on
She
the
asked
spot.
She's as bad as you are, Josh, asking all the Brooke asked all the super hard questions.
I've been trying to ask nicer questions since I've had you on.
Yeah. So Brooke, I love the way you set it up. You said, so Watley, you're just being a reactionary or what? We got to go back to horse and buggies. That's your marker in time when everything was good? No, of course not. So you're speaking to what's our philosophy of time. And most people in society today tend to have a Hegelian view of time. Tomorrow is going to be better than today. Today is better than it was yesterday. And the reactionaries say, no, we're not Hegelians. The past is the best, but really they're kind of taking a fixed position in time. They still have a particular view of time that determines what they think. I think, like I mentioned earlier, a philosophical conservatism or a classical conservatism mediates between both the universal and the particular. So you try to identify those universal truths, like you mentioned, right? Some things in scripture we can say, yeah, that's true across time and space all around the world. And how do we now apply those truths in a particular culture? I'll just really nerd out on you. Some of my in-laws are involved with community building and worldwide missions, and they say it is so crucial that you go culture, language, then the gospel. So if that's what you're trying to do, don't start with the final message. So Brooke, you said, the message is important. I agree with you. However, if you don't really understand the language, you're going to mess up that message. You're going to twist it all. If you don't understand the cultural background and how people are going to hear the message that you're saying, you're going to mess it all up. And so that's the way I'm interpreting McLuhan, and the medium is the message. Now, McLuhan was weird too, right? He said a whole bunch of weird things just to get popular. And so I'm not saying he's my prophet or anything, but I think there's an opportunity to look at what he said and apply it to what we're going through today.
Robert Putnam was also not someone who always got everything right, but they were both very insightful people. I'm thinking here, Sean, of I think the way you set that up is very helpful. That we're a sort of, and I forget how you said, not a books or a words based or a literary based society, if you will, Western civilization. In a lot of ways, that's entirely true. And Brooke, to your point, what came before that was more oral. It was there was a lot of effort expended. There's a lot of blood spilled to get us to where we are today, to kind of make sense of what do we do with a largely print-based society. We didn't get it right out of the gate. And I'm not necessarily saying it was always a one step of improvement all the way there, but there were a lot of religious wars fought before we finally figured out a way to do this without killing each other over relatively minor religious disputes. I'm not saying they were unimportant, but not necessarily for the purpose of political society. I think one of the things I'm concerned about is, to the degree things like AI could be fundamentally changing that, if to the degree we're talking about a new industrial revolution, to the degree we're talking about we're leaving the oral world to go into the print world, it does seem like we humans have a tendency to learn all the wrong lessons first, to kind of stumble around to get to it. And I don't mean that there can't be bright spots within that and growth, but that sometimes these are the accrued, lessons, historical examples over centuries that we get to build off of. And that's great when you're 200 years looking in the rear view mirror at the last time we had to go through one of these things. It's very different when you're right at the beginning. And so I guess that's a part of the foreboding of some of these technological changes. And I don't even know if, maybe it's a mistake to just boil it all down to AI or technology. It does seem like there's a lot of ways in which for lack of a better way to put this, the baby boomers' hold on the world is beginning to loosen. What does that mean? The mindset, the duopoly they've had for many, many years, the, let's call it broader liberal, small case L, neoconservative liberal consensus is being questioned. New World Order is being questioned in a way that would have never been questioned, 10 years ago. everything seems a little up for grabs. And is this, are we 20 years from now just going to look back and say, no, it was just another little minor hiccup? It didn't really change it. I remember when the Segway scooter came out, there were a couple of places that ran articles that this was the most important technological advancement since, I don't know, the radio, which is absurd, but somehow somebody thought that. So are we possibly just getting in over our skis over, it feels crazy and uncertain and it's really not that much, or is there really something to it? Are we really staring a very new future in the face?
I genuinely believe that AI will, at the minimum, have as much of an impact on human life as the internet did, and does. When a lot of people talk about an AI bubble, all I'm thinking about is the .com bubble, when a lot of people were a little bit too fast on the investment button, a little bit too quick, but that did not mean that the internet in and of itself was meaningless. I mean, you see how even the most traditional, not technology friendly societies have to depend on the internet in one way or another today. It is part of our life. It is part of our bloodstream, almost as, perhaps even as much as food, water, shelter, and so forth. So I think AI is going to do that as well. Beyond that, like I said, it's hard to tell because it's so new. We are in the year 2000 when it comes to AI, and we didn't much understand much about the potentiality of the internet then. And so we're just going to have to figure it out. And regarding the question of the medium as the message, I kind of agree and I kind of disagree. People, and having read Neil Postman, Postman has a very Pollyannish view of print culture that does not really adhere to how ordinary Americans below the elites or college educated level, and few people went to college in those days, actually read. Okay. Most people, they learn how to read, and there's nothing wrong with that. They learn how to read from dime novels, the penny press, the yellow press, pulp detective novels, stuff like that. They did not all grow up reading Aristotle and Plato, although they did in that era almost overwhelmingly learn that. But his idea that everybody was just the ideal platonic democratic citizen just doesn't fit. All right. I did an episode on the Gilded Age and electioneering with a great scholar named John Greenspan. He's at the Smithsonian Institute, and he talks a lot about how lots of people voted Republican because they had great beer parties, or they voted Democratic because they had greater songs, or because, I don't know, if you didn't do it, the one activist or another would beat you up. It's not that there wasn't high-minded discussion. There was a lot of high-minded discussion, but it was never the entire population. Entertainment has always been a part of political discourse. It has always been, including cheap entertainment, including lowbrow entertainment, including the stuff we would all thumb our noses at. And so in that sense, television and social media and so on and so forth, they're just better at it. They're a much better form. They're a much better efficient form. So I think I would agree to an extent that it's not just the medium. This tendency has pre-existed. It existed in oral culture too. And I think any discussion of how to make things better needs to take into account that a lot of people, they just want to be entertained. They don't really believe that politics, they probably believe that the politicians on both sides are both awful, so let me at least have fun, or things like that. So I think that needs to be taken into account when discussing the medium is the message. I think that in this case, being not a reactionary, but at the very least a conservative who understands that a lot of these things have been around for a long time, just in different forms, and learning lessons from each time these things manifested in terms of some people want the truth and some people want entertainment, and how do you manage that in order to be able to have a healthy mass democracy?
I've been falling behind on my duty as host here because I just happened to notice the time. We're right up towards the end of the hour, and we will need to wrap pretty soon. I know some of you need to hop soon. So feel free to respond to that open question, but I want to also begin rounds of, let's say, closing thoughts here. Things we haven't, I mean, the future is a big topic, things we haven't discussed you wish we would, closing thoughts you might have based on everything we've talked before. Brooke, I'm going to start with you, and then whoever wants to jump in after that.
Thank you, Josh, and thank you, gentlemen, for this good discussion. Overall, I'm excited about the future, but I would say that the AI and the technology that we want is the AI and technology that we're going to get. And I believe that comes from some old principles, articulated very well by St. Augustine, which is talking about our ordered loves and what we value. Wanting to be entertained is nothing new. Unfortunately, there was the reason the term bread and circuses exists is because this is an ancient desire. It's a human desire. And so the way our brains are wired now, sure, they might be a little bit different, but overall, there's a human problem, or there's also maybe a human solution. And I do believe that what 10 years from now happens and looks like largely depends on the world that we create today, how we invest in our communities, how we take care of others, how we love our neighbors, how we take care of our families. These are ways in which what we end up discussing 10 years from now are going to be shaped by those decisions. And hey, if we have a great ChatGPT experience as a result of that, and all of our kids have wonderful AI engineering jobs, wonderful. I hope we don't go back to the Stone Ages. Either way, I don't want to go backwards. I'm excited about the technological advances, but I do hope we all keep our bearings, and I'm hopeful for that. But I think that really largely depends on who we are and who we choose to be.
Yeah, I wanted my closing thoughts to be a response to Avi. I love what you're saying, and I love not to romanticize, the print media past, or this idea that everybody was an intellectual 100 years ago. I don't want to give that impression. But I think most college-educated people were fairly well read, even 50 years ago, in a way that they're not today. In my graduate level courses for finishing my master's degree, a lot of my professors would say, don't even bother buying the textbook. We're not going to go over it. I think we live in a functionally illiterate society, in the sense that people are perfectly capable of reading. They can read the title of a video, they can read a tweet, but they don't have the attention span to read an entire 200-page book. I'm just not being entertained enough. And that fact alone, that lack of attention span, is what technology generally and AI more recently is doing to us, that I think is going to have a long-term consequence.
Maybe I'll jump in there, and then Avi, you can tell us how we've misinterpreted what you've said, and set us straight. You'll get the final word. That's what I'm trying to say. So yeah, I love your comments about. Sorry, we get to say goodbye to Brooke. See ya.
Yeah, Brooke's got an early start for tomorrow. Thank you so much for coming. It was great to have you with us, Brooke.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
See ya. So I love the fact that Avi, you straightened us out and said, not everybody wasn't reading Plato 100 years ago. Absolutely right. And I guess my comments about a print-based culture building on what Ryan said, are referring to what was our source of legitimacy and authority for a culture overall. So Brooke referred to Augustine. Well, I mean, he wrote books. That's how we know about Augustine. Aquinas. Pick any person that we refer to as a pillar in the thinking of Western culture, and it's from a print-based medium. And so it shapes our understanding about truth, evidence, logic, argument. Now, absolutely, people had arguments in public and public debates, but ultimately it's within this perhaps hard to define idea of a print-based culture. And that's what I'm worried about losing. But my final closing thought, Josh, would be to say that if you get a chance, take a look at Nathan Penkoski's article from the fall of 2024 about actually existing post-liberalism. We haven't mentioned post-liberalism at all. Most people think, well, we're already beyond that discussion. And Penkoski, Nathan picks up on that, and he says, actually, we've been living in a post-liberal society for many decades now, one of the fundamental ideas within a liberal, post-war liberal society was that there's a separation between the state and society. There's a separation between the public and the private. He said, since the war on terror started, that's gone. The state is very much interested in everything you're doing and monitoring what you're doing, and now even monitoring your tweets, right? We were talking about X and posts on social media, and certainly in Canada, it seems to be going even faster in that direction. So that's my concern. I think unless we come up with a winsome, articulate defense of a classical conservatism. Roger Scruton, I love him. I can't have a podcast without mentioning him. He said, conservatism is a work of rescue. So how can we rescue the things that we love and be honest about the attachments that we've inherited, and how can we structure our lives in this present moment with social media, AI, and all the other exciting things that are happening with it, but with a measure of sanity that we've inherited. So that's where my head's going. And so in this next year, I'm worried about, hopefully we can push back against the actually existing post-liberalism that's around us by encouraging people to realize that it's here. And what can we do by rearranging our lives in such a way that we can push back on that a bit?
So great comments all around. I don't think I'll be able to respond to everything in full, so my apologies. I think a lot of people, I'm an English teacher now. There's a lot of people talk in those spaces about, especially in the conservative spaces, about techniques, right? Techniques for better teaching, techniques for better instruction. But I think that that's not enough. Human beings, and I say thank God for that, are not purely coldly logical, rational beings. I think if we did that, we'd get to some very dark places, right? I mean, God forbid you could say, yeah, you could solve the homeless problem by just shooting everybody, for instance. I think that you need to create both skills and emotional attachments, sentiments. It's about love. It's about gratitude. I think that I often talk about how a lot of what we're suffering from is the fact that we won the Cold War. Because when we were still fighting the Cold War, there was a clear contra. Communism is like this, we are like this. They deny these rights, we grant these rights. And in the 19th century, it was, absolutist monarchies are all tyrannies and we give everybody freedom. There, the aristocracy controls all the lands and the good jobs. Here, you can get it on your own steam and on your own merit. We don't care who your parents were, to an extent. And the problem is that having won, it's hard to be that person who constantly reminds people over and over and over again truths that are old but are still truths. That these things that we have, they didn't come out from the ether. They didn't come out naturally. A lot of people did not expect the United States, for instance, to last very long. It's not easy to be the people to tell generation after generation, even without a clear ideological enemy, that these are things that we could lose. These are things we need to appreciate. These are things we need to cherish, not just in terms of the fact that many generations fought for them, but because they're good in and of themselves. One of my favorite examples that is relevant to contemporary culture is if you look at any really good movie or video game or computer game, and you look up the sources of inspiration for that game, you will see a wealth of classical literature, of all sorts of ideas from ancient texts. You will see, because the people who are really good creators are really well read. And it doesn't matter what field we're talking about. And it doesn't even matter what their politics are. They are always and consistently incredibly knowledgeable about their field. And I think that most importantly, not just in the schools, but institutions, the communities, some people try and go about it and say, let's sell this as here's a way for you to get ahead. And I think that that's wrong. We need to appreciate this in and of itself. And it's good and healthy to appreciate this in and of itself. And that is something I think that we should teach from an early age, and we should teach adults. And that is something we should focus on, not just what uses of it's mean. Now, even though there are great uses, I think that we should be focusing on how we can create a strong emotional attachment so that people feel, I want to know more about this. I want to know more about this incredible world and what created it and why I live in such a great time while, you know, people 300 years ago did not. I think that that would be a much healthier way to encourage the virtues of love, of gratitude, and deep attachment to the things we have, and learn why we have them. And I think that that would help counter the very modern tendency of, well, I don't care as long as it's not. If it's new, it's great. If not, if it's old, I don't care. I think that would help deepen and strengthen and somewhat counteract that. Once you start building that, that's the foundation. You can build things on top of that. But you need to build that sense of attachment, that sense of gratitude, that sense of this matters to me, even though I wasn't around to see it. I think that's where we need to start, regardless of what technologies came in the past and what technologies come in the future.
I think it's a great conversation anytime we end up invoking names like Aristotle or Sir Roger Scruton. Sean will give you kudos for two of them, both Scruton and Yuval Levin, and that's where my mind went. I borrow from Levin that thought all the time. Don't say it exactly that way, but I think that's a good way to say it. I'm not an optimist. I'm a conservative. I'm hopeful, and the hopeful is a virtue. Hopeful implies, as Levin, beautifully explains, it involves some agency on our part, some responsibility on our part, and I would want that to be maybe the overriding message in pretty much all of the shows that I do, but especially this one, that you, the audience, have some participation in this great question. No, you can't change the world by yourself, but that doesn't mean you can't have some impact. It doesn't mean that hope isn't something worth working towards, and that we ought not to have good reason to hope. We certainly do. So hopefully this has been a hopeful conversation, even as we enter what could be a very uncertain year and what could be a very difficult year. We don't know what the future lies, in store for us, but we do have hope. So with that, I want to thank Sean, Ryan, Avi, and Brooke, who had to hop early. All the panelists. I want to thank everyone who watched, and we will see you guys next time.